Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Kat Belshaw and I'm a proud member of the Full Planner team. And I'm very excited to be your host for today's panel. This panel will run until about 5:15 Eastern Standard Time. And then we'll actually have a Kahoot if you've been following along with that, as well as Q&A. So please stay tuned. I want to mention that we are pleased to offer closed captioning technology for today's session and for all our sessions this weekend, so I hope you're taking advantage of that. We also want to acknowledge that the fold takes place on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded Indigenous territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, First Nation, and traditional homeland for the Wendat, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee Nations. As we make this acknowledgement, we are dedicated to continuing to increase our own awareness, understanding, and conscientious action on this land. I want to make sure you know that this virtual space is meant to be a safe space for all attendees, guests, panelists. We also want to make sure you use the Q&A box at the top or bottom of your screen to ask questions throughout the panel. If you're joining us by phone, please also be sure that you're checking Twitter throughout the event for questions from the audience using the hashtag #Fold2020. So keep on the hashtag #Fold2020. Now it's my pleasure to introduce to you today's presenter. Wayne Grady will be moderating this panel. Wayne is the author of works of both nonfiction and fiction, including 2 novels, Emancipation Day and Upcome Freedom, as well as being an award-winning translator. So thank you and welcome, Wayne. Once the session is over, I'll be back for a few final housekeeping items, as well as that Kahoot, so stay tuned for that. Now over to Wayne. Enjoy the panel.
Hi, my name is Avnan Khan, and I'll be reading from my novel, There Has to Be a Knife. Her parents' house is long and narrow, 2 windows up top, 2 windows on the main floor, and a tiny crack of chimney on the right side. A kid's drawing, a puff of smoke. Their lawn is brown-green and cut badly, short near the roadside, but tufted near the windows. 1-car drive with a black Lexus that I squeeze past. The wooden gate to the back has no clasp. It swings lightly. The side window over the kitchen seems like a good entry point. The motion detector light near the side door comes on. I wait. My breath in the air, and I'm sure there's a raccoon somewhere that I can't see. No shadows, no movements. I move again. The kitchen window looks large enough to fit me. I look around for something to stand on. The light has gone off, but when I move, it pops back on. I convince myself that nothing will happen. It's okay. It's cool. I flip over the empty recycling box and look at the window. A small wooden block in place to prevent it from being opened. It has not been slotted correctly, and with a little nudge, I could move it, but it'll fall into the sink and make a noise that will travel upstairs. I watched a few YouTube videos on lockpicking. I don't want to break the window or cut the mesh. I want to be a ghost, to visit Anna like she is. There are no cars on the street. It doesn't matter. I look to the sky and ask who's watching. I've been to this house a few times before, and a small memory tumbles at me. It was an awkward dinner, a birthday party, I think 17, and she introduced me to her parents as her friend. We had emailed about this, I was warned, but a shot of pain came at me anyway. Her parents allowed us to drink beer in the basement, only beer, no hard liquor, and I swallowed 5 straight. She drank 9 and puked, evergreen. I held her hair over the toilet until Bernie came down and asked me to leave. Her hair was matted to her skull skin by all the hot sweat that appears when a body moves with sickness. I held her nape when she puked, and even then I wanted to kiss her. I wanted her father to see that, to know I wanted to fuck his daughter. I didn't want to hide anything. I wanted that revenge of desire for him to know that I had fucked her. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Kafiso and I'm gonna read from Such a Lonely, Lovely Road. It's confusing, you know, to feel on the one hand sad and sorry that someone you love is dead, and then on the other hand, utterly relieved. Since I'm many different things, many different men, I suppose there's bound to be confusion here and there. So sorry and relieved is what I felt when that cold morning in May, Sidiba, my former lover, phoned to tell me that my father had died suddenly without warning. I'd been dreaming about him, my lover, not my father, and longing for him more than my body could stand. One minute, he was in the dream with me, and the next, I was crawling across the bed on my stomach to pick up the phone, pushing back the pain when I noticed, as I did every morning, that the bed was too large and too empty. Before I could say hello, he was launching into it, starting and stopping as though he dreaded getting to the point. He told me my father had not had the chance to see his first patient that morning. His secretary had found him lying on the floor near the door, right hand clutching his left arm, and so on. I let him speak, the details becoming less important as he carried on. Gabza, he whispered, as if to soften the blow. Ish, Joe, Askis. You know how everyone mixes languages? He and I had always done this, except when we were alone, we'd pour in a lot more English. We'd never do it around our friends in Gasi because the way we spoke to each other was as much a secret as we were. I wondered if I might still be dreaming, because even as his voice came from the other end of the line, my flat carried the familiar scent of his skin. I could feel my tongue moving to taste something that was not there. I knew I was supposed to be thinking about my father, but my mind raced back, sifting through time and details, calculating. How long had it been since the caller and I had last spoken to each other? Had it been months? How many months? I wanted to ask, but first I had to find my voice. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Daniel Ramadan and I'll be reading today from The Clothesline Swing, a novel I released a couple of years ago. I was born in my grandfather's house in Damascus. My father was 19 and my mother was 17. He heard my mother scream, he heard a short, snappy cry, and saw the midwife leave the room holding a blanket covering a red being that made fake gestures with its hands. Pray in his ears, the midwife whispers. Kabbir in his ear. My father, young, silly, unaware of what awaits him, held my body and whispered in my ear, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allah is great. In the mid-80s, you would only hear those Allahu Akbars spoken outside of mosques when a baby was born or when they were screamed out loud as a sign of total astonishment. For example, when my uncles watched a football match on the old staticky TV, they would throw things in the air and scream Allahu Akbar when their favorite team scored. The next morning, one of them would be sitting with friends who had seen the same match, smoking argile under the white neon lights of a cafe in old Damascus. They would be drinking tea and my uncle would be telling his friends about the goal they all had seen the night before. We weren't sure we'd make it, ya zalame, he would say. Suddenly, Allahu Akbar, we won. The meaning of words changes with time. 30 years later, Allahu Akbar scares the word and injects fear into the hearts of millions. Dark-featured fighters carrying long swords were beheading people or screaming Allahu Akbar with the same amusement my uncles felt for their football matches. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That was terrific. I must say that all three of these novels are compelling and original, and I just was fascinated to read in all through them. They were because I was born and raised in Canada. They were all exotic for me. Even the Vancouver setting was I mean, I know Vancouver, but the evocation of place in all of your novels was extremely vivid, and I was very happy to. It was almost like traveling to those places. In Toronto, even Toronto. I know Toronto, but one of the things that occurred to me as I was reading was the question that I ask myself a lot as a novelist is, why do we write novels? Why do we what do we hope to accomplish with a book? Do we want to? I think we see the chaos and the confusion of the world. Do we want to reflect that and to communicate that chaos to our readers, or do we want to help find a solution or an order to that chaos? Can I ask each of you in turn to sort of, it's a very small question, but just as a way of sort of getting into what we're trying to do with our fiction. I mean, the theme of the talk, of the discussion is justice from injustice. And do we think that we're going to advance the cause of justice with our work? Danny,
Sure, awesome. I can go. Hi, folks. Well, thank you for that question. I really appreciate it, Wayne. I think that there are intentions, direct intentions that come to mind when I'm thinking about the time that I was writing The Clothesline Swing, and then the indirect results of actually writing the Clothesline Swing. To understand that, I look back at the time that I was working on The Clothesline Swing. I was still a refugee in Lebanon. I worked on The Clothesline Swing during the 2 years that I was a Syrian refugee in Lebanon, and then finalized the book in my first year here in Canada. It's funny because I actually wrote many of the Vancouver scenes before I actually came to Vancouver, which one of the scenes that I remember, I had the two main characters living in this lush big home in the West End, and then I arrived to Vancouver and figured out the rent, and I was like, nope, they're not living there at all.
they're most interior scenes anyway, so
yeah, so I managed to play around with that. But when I was writing The Clothesline Swing, to go back to your question, I was truly just writing because I was struggling quite a lot with my own lived experience. I was going through a lot of traumatic experiences that I didn't even realize that they were traumatic until years of therapy later. And I was writing the book in this selfish act of dealing with those traumatic experiences and coming out of them while holding to my sanity, I guess. Now, the indirect result of writing that book is that, yes, a lot of folks who read that book, who identified with the story, found it to be soothing the same way that when I wrote it, it was soothing for me to write. So I feel like, in a way, it was navigating the trauma of my own experiences, but going through that navigation allowed others who read the book to feel similarly.
Mm-hmm. Kagso, is that the case with you too? That you almost realized the degree of trauma that you and Kapso, your character, lived through by writing the book?
No, I think I was always aware of the degree of trauma. And I think that to answer your first question, I was thinking, when you grow up in a place of silence, in terms of being not being allowed to speak your mind at any point, and having the world around you censored, that's just the very act of writing a novel is revolutionary, or feels revolutionary, because there's so much freedom in giving yourself the space to say everything that you feel needs to be said. Right. So when I write, I think my number one goal is usually to create discussion around a certain subject. So I'm always very excited to put work out that I hope will get people talking. So for example, you know, the topic of two African men in love was incredibly important to me because I know that it's dangerous to be both African and queer, and that it's, you know, that every day is a struggle. And I wanted to create a space that would feel safe for queer African people to, you know, find themselves. And I think that we look to books a lot of the time to find answers, but I don't think novelists necessarily create novels to give answers. But I think I just wanted a safe space for people to kind of ask themselves questions, and then hopefully to, you know, create discussion between a lot of different people.
Right. And you set the book in the 80s, I think, wasn't it? Is it?
In the 90s.
In the 90s. But
yeah.
Has things changed for queer people in South Africa since then?
No, I mean, you know, they haven't changed that much. I mean, you know, now people can actually meet in public, you know, people can be you know, openly affectionate, but it's still dangerous to be openly affectionate. And there's always this idea that being African and being queer are two different things. They don't go together. Right. So it is, you know, South Africa is very far ahead in that they got the what they call the gay clause in the Constitution all the way back in '97, and it was the first country to do that. But you know, as we know, what's in the Constitution doesn't always apply to what happens on the streets. So right. I wanted to talk about that aspect of it too, that there are people who are safer than others, but mostly being African and being gay is, you know, it feels dangerous still. Yeah.
Adnan, and is that in your case? What would you say what did you hope that readers would get from your book, from other than pleasure?
I think for me, the primary concern are still aesthetic. I try not to think about how the book will live in the exterior world, just because I can't. You know, it's not something that I can really corral or control. Right. And I also think that, you know, part of the joy for me in writing is that exploration, that investigation, and it's really important to untether myself from any sort of ideas I may have and any sort of notions I may have, which is why driving it towards a resolution that I think is appropriate. For me, it's like, well, you know, I'm not an arbitrator of justice. It's difficult for me to say that there's an ethical endpoint that the work should achieve or should reach. So I'm more curious about sort of just doing that exploration and letting it lead where it may and letting it sort of fall how it does.
Is there a sense of being a witness in your work that you're telling people about a lifestyle or a kind of life that they might not otherwise meet?
No, there's no sense of exteriority like that. Like I don't approach it by saying I'm translating or I'm relating or reporting on an experience. It's more focused on sort of the interior aspect of it.
Right.
And as both writers have talked about, you know, there is a degree of I'm doing this for myself, which is where I think the fulfillment comes from. So I like to keep that on the forefront.
In all three of your books, I mean, I talk about racism briefly. In all three of your books, it seems that racism is a backdrop to the book. That it's not, that they're not about racism itself. They almost take racism for granted. And what is in the foreground are you know, for example, in Kagiso's the trials in both Danny's and Kagiso's, the trials of being gay in a hostile world, is that your experience that the racism is so much part of our lives that it's not even worth talking about so much in fiction?
I don't think it's worth defining over and over again. Right. You know, I think in a lot of texts and a lot of movies and stuff like that, what you see is this constant redefinition of racism, this constant sort of letting the audience know that, hey, racism exists, we should do something about it. Rather, I viewed it sort of as a parameter of existence, in the same way that you might view class or, you know, even the weather. These are the things that are woven into our lives, and we sort of reflect them and refract them. But there are also other things going on in our lives. So, you know, it's all held in our hands at once. And I think that's really the difference that I'm seeing in sort of the second wave writers and things like that, where this is a real experience. It's woven in a way that I hope we don't have to explain or justify anymore. And I think in that way, you can sort of reach a deeper understanding and a deeper rendering of that lived experience.
Right.
I agree with that. I agree with that quite a lot, actually. I also, if you thought that there's some mention of racism in this book, wait for the next one. My next book has a lot of focus on that integration of what it means to face racism and as part of your lived experience in general.
Right.
And I think that a big part of me is that I really don't subscribe to this idea, this like Hollywood perfect, picture perfect navigation of racism, like the movie Hidden Figures, for example. Those three women who are dealing with racism, and then the white savior comes in and saves the day and everything is fine. I don't subscribe to that navigation. I think that my experience of racism is navigating life at all times with my identity on my face. Like I'm not just a person of color when I'm standing on a podium and talking about people of color. I'm also a person of color when I'm buying my coffee in the morning and when I am walking the streets and when I get on the bus. So navigating those kind of interactions with an understanding of the intersectionality between being queer, between being a person of color, as well as just trying to have a lived experience that is positive, leads to a deeper understanding of your characters, I think. And that's the kind of thing that I want to bring into my books.
There's a sense in your book that, well, I mean, I probably not the first person to notice a comparison, for example, with 1001 Arabian Nights.
Yeah.
Where it's art, it's storytelling that is hopefully saving lives here. Not in this case, not the storyteller's life, but the person who's listening to the story. But but I very much got the sense that art is life-giving and life-preserving in your book, in all of your books. Yeah.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Yes, this is something that I focused on in the Clothesline Swing. And I think it's also something I focused on in my next novel. I'm like writing my second draft right now, which is more about denying storytelling, which in a way is keeping oneself contained with their own stories, which might result in building more trauma within yourself. Yeah, but that's, yeah.
Right. Kagaso, and in your novel, Kabso, there's a lot going on in the novel about around the notion of safety. You say at one point, or the narrator says at one point, that people will go to great lengths to stay safe or to be safe. What kind of safety are your characters looking for or hoping for?
So my protagonist is an African man, but middle class, with a lot of privilege, and that for him is safe. It's safe to be middle class. It's safe to have all the privilege that he does. It's safe for him to, have the opportunity to go to medical school, to be adored by his community. That is the space that feels safe. I think then the challenge for him is to get out of that safety and identify as queer to his community. And that's where it feels very scary. That's where his world sort of, turns around, and that's where he's very frightened. I think he keeps running away from his community, from his duties, because being privileged, because his privilege is what saves him all the time. And I think the challenge is to get out of that. But I think when you're South African, safety is a primary concern for many different reasons. And I don't think that you can be Black and South African and feel completely safe in any place. Right. What initially led to the book was I had done research for my thesis, my undergraduate thesis, on gay spaces in South Africa under apartheid, and I was interested in how queer men especially would meet in these underground places where they were, you know, they would meet people of different colors in a country where it was very segregated. But for a time in the night, these spaces became the safe spaces to be queer for people of different, you know, different backgrounds. People who would not, you know, eat at the same restaurant because it was illegal would then go into these places that were secret and find safety in, you know, being out in those places. So that was, you know, that's kind of, those are the kind of safety concerns in the book. Yeah.
You link the idea of safety with the idea of equilibrium, and that seems to get to that. I think Epso wants an equilibrium in the sense that he wants the same kind of safety that he has in his home life. He wants that in his social life, in his sexual life as well. Is that what you meant by equilibrium, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's this idea that he has in South Africa, I think, and I'm specific. This book is specific to South Africa, so I keep going back to that. I think that he wants to feel like he can navigate all parts of his world easily. And he knows that he can't, and he knows that he has to choose, and there isn't any kind of balance in his life because of that. So I think that's what I meant, that there isn't such balance to be found in his world, and he's constantly struggling with that. Yeah.
Right. And Adnan, in your novel, I don't think Omar ever finds any kind of safety or any kind of place where he feels safe. Is that the way you think it? Is that the way you see it as well?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I don't want to render it for anybody, but certainly I think that question of where do you find safety and what that means is quite prevalent. That's one of the curiosities of the novel. And I think in the book, he's trying to hint at it that it might come from another person. And I think that's the struggle that he's really trying to work out for himself.
Right. The novel is almost a quest novel. He's looking for this maybe non-existent suicide note from his lover. Does that represent, like, what does he hope what does he hope will be resolved if he finds that? I mean, that, to me, that's what drives his every time he gets close to any kind of safety or peace, he drops it and he goes after that note again and gets himself into deeper trouble. What is the importance of that note?
I really appreciate you calling it I really appreciate you calling it a quest novel, because I tried that a few times and no one believed me.
Oh, really? Yeah.
That is what the rendering is meant to be, where that's supposed to be the carrot at the end of the stick.
Yeah.
But
in a quest novel, achieving the quest and finding the golden fleece or whatever it is supposed to make the world a better place. For him, it doesn't so much. I mean, I'm not getting.
I think the primary thing was, what is the quest and what is the question and what does that knowledge give you, right? And what do you do with that knowledge? How do you access it? Are you making that up? Is it a kind of self-delusion where you think that this is the way that I will sort of scaffold my life? But for him to find out at various turns that maybe the answers are not what he wants them to be, and what is that process of confronting answers when they aren't appearing in the way that you want them to. So I think that's really important. And what I hope to achieve was this sort of representation of that search, and what it means to undergo that search, and what it means at the end to sort of maybe realize that the question in the first place might have been wrong.
Right. Danny, when your characters get to arrive in Vancouver, they say your narrator says that for the first 2 months they live very peacefully in a kind of a honeymoon with Vancouver, but then after that first couple of months they began to argue. and they were in that weird position of not being able to stand being apart, but they also couldn't really stand being together either. And again, I'm sort of coming back to the idea of equilibrium. They actually separate for a while, and so that the whole that idea of equilibrium is lost. Is that that quest for the search for equilibrium it seems to be something important in all three of the novels. Can you talk about how important that was, or what it meant for your two characters?
I mean, I can, but spoiler alert, I wrote that in the middle of the novel. Now people know where the characters are going to break up. No, I'm joking.
Oh, well, yeah. The middle is okay. I won't give away the end.
Please don't. I mean, I kind of give away the end in the very first chapter, but people would read anyway.
Yeah, no, they will for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that it makes perfect sense for folks who go through a similar experience as immigrating, specifically when they are removed from one culture completely and then thrown into a complete, almost opposite culture, where they were rejected for their queerness, but then embraced for their queerness, where they were the norm for being people of color in a community of people of color, and then they come in and they are the abnormal, the exotic in a community of white folks. So there's this like complete shift in their lived experience, and both characters are at the end of the day in service of the wounds they had back in their days back in Damascus. So they are looking at those wounds, and they brought those wounds with them back to Vancouver, because you don't, at the day that you arrive at the airport, you don't leave your history back behind you. You bring all of that with you. And that's my personal experience. And I think that that's something that a lot of immigrants agree on. There's this notion that the minute that folks arrive from the other side of the world to Vancouver, to Canada, wherever it is that is North America, or wherever it is that is considered a first world country, it's the end of the movie. It's the happy ending of the movie. Like, people are going to just make out randomly in an airport, and then the credits are going to roll. And that's completely unrealistic to consider when we're talking about two characters who both were faced traumatic experiences back home, and then they face the traumatic experience of arriving here into a complete different culture with a complete cut from their past together.
Yeah, I think Edward Said talked about that consequence of emigrating. You don't leave one behind. The other, you bring it with you, and you actually are living two lives at the same time. You're still living in the place that you came from, and you're like a palimpsest on top of the place where you are, and so you're carrying two realities. It's a must be very disconcerting experience.
It's quite interesting because they actually scientifically proven that folks who speak multiple languages actually have different personalities to fit with their own with the different languages. So I'm actually a bit of a different person when I speak Arabic, and I think that that's also translates into your character and the way that you navigate the world. Like I think that I'm funny in English, but I'm really boring in Arabic, for example. I think that I'm way more poetic and nostalgic in Arabic writing, but more to the point when I'm writing in English. It just you present yourself in different lights under different cultures, under different circumstances, because
So
you're part of that culture. Sorry?
Is Arabic a more poetic language than English?
Well, let me put it that way. English in total has 6 million words. Arabic has 560 million words.
I knew
all of them.
What are we missing? What can't we say in English?
For example, we have 40 different words for sunrise.
Right.
Because it depends on what exactly the time of sunrise, specifically because it doesn't just impact us culturally, but also impact us religiously, because certain times of sunrise is the time that you start praying, and certain times of sunrise is when you missed your period for praying.
Right, right, yeah. Kagzo, your main character doesn't have to emigrate in order to feel surrounded by a different culture. How does that play out in daily life, and or did it in the 90s anyway for Kagzo to be surrounded in his own country by another culture?
Well, it's interesting as Daniel was talking, because I was thinking actually there is a lot of immigrating going on in South Africa. We have this joke in South Africa that when you go to Cape Town, you need your passport with you, because so much of Cape Town is very, very, very white, and you feel like a foreigner in your own country. And the way the country was designed, it was in such a way that people were so separate that whenever they move into a different city or a different language, a place where there's a different language group, you really do feel like you have left the country that you live in, right? So for him, again, it feels more comfortable to be in Cape Town because Cape Town is so white, and he makes white friends, and he completely separates from the Black people he knows. And so in that way, you can be in the same country and be a completely different person. And he speaks English instead of Tswana, which is his mother tongue. So he stays in Cape Town for a while, and from Cape Town he goes to Durban, because in those two places, there are no people who speak his language, or very few. And he can feel himself safely lost in a white world where being queer is a lot more accepted, and there isn't that constant question of, being gay is un-African, as, Mugabe once said, and many other presidents said, and a lot of people believe, that you're a traitor if you're adopting European ways. So he does feel himself a completely different person, and it's kind of like he's also queer in English, and in Tswana he's a straight man. So he has these two completely different worlds, which was my experience of living in South Africa, in that I went to desegregated schools. So there were mainly white schools. And so we were, just a few Black students. And I moved between these two different worlds every day. I mean, I lived in a place where it was Blacks only. And then I went to school in a place that had just very, very, very recently become desegregated. So the buses were still segregated. So I didn't go to school with the school buses. So I understand these two worlds and how confusing it can be. And I understand also, feeling you have a different personality in different languages. Yeah.
But I didn't get the sense that it would have been easier for him to come out in Cape Town than it was in his hometown. I mean, eventually he does. Well, sorry, spoiler alert.
Oh God.
But I kept wanting him to, as his lover was encouraging him to be more in touch with himself and with his own sexuality. But that he didn't find that any easier when he was in a white community than he did elsewhere. Is that true?
Well, no, but a little bit easier. He was more out and had more friends in Cape Town. I mean, it's also interesting that you were talking about race earlier, in that, when he's in the white community, he, talks about how the white guys look at him and how he feels exotic and how he feels like he's being studied, right? And then, so it's not easier for him
stereotype.
Yeah, so it's not much easier for him to be out for that reason, not so much because he's gay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And when he's back home, he's more accepted, more embraced, because he's, Black doctor who's gonna take care of our dying community. So he's kind of a hero of sorts, and everybody around him is Black, and he feels adored and admired. And
his father was a doctor.
And his father was a doctor, so he has that family history, yeah. But so, as he says at the beginning of the book, I am many different men. And wherever he is in the country, he becomes a completely different person. Right.
Yeah. But there's a sense I think of living a lie in Kagzo, right?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, obviously, I mean, he's not. And Adnan, in your novel, I think Omar at one point says it's okay to tell a lie as long as it's a version of the truth. Um, how does that? I mean, I remember reading that and thinking, well, no, that's not true. But then, isn't that what fiction is, right? It's a lie. That's a version of the truth. How does that play out in everyday life? That in your characters, that does Omar feel like he sort of tells lies a lot, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's quite a liar. He's quite into deceiving people.
It's for
One of the things
survival,
also I want, sorry?
for his own survival in many
For his
cases.
own survival, but also again, he's creating, right? He's creating this world that he lives in,
Yeah.
and that's constantly while he's questioning, he's also creating. And one thing I wanted to do and wanted to bring out was the sort of difference between the dialogue in the book and the prose. You know, the prose sort of weaves in and out of a high register type of prose into a slang type of prose, and the dialogue when he talks to different people is done in a very different way. And you know, that was an attempt at me to show code switching that we, you know, people in this panel have talked about, those different identities, those different lives. You know, when you speak in different languages, you have different personalities, you have a hidden life. Tying those ideas together is what I was trying to show on the page, was that this creation of life is different depending on who you're speaking to, what work environment you're in, and things like that. So in a sense, it is a deception, but then it also brings back to the root of what it means to sort of have that core identity, and under how many layers of personhood have you kept that core identity, and what is Omar trying to protect with these deceptions? What is he trying to achieve? So certainly, yeah, I think on the face of it, there's a bit of shaky moral ground that he's on, but I want the reader to ask themselves what he's trying to get at.
I think there's a sense in here that you know, any sense that we had of moral behavior is sort of suspended now. I mean, morality, it's almost like there's a situational morality, that the moral compass shifts depending on what situation one is in. Is that true?
I think for me, the way to look at it is that the moral compass is not what we thought it was.
Right.
I'm not sure if you can say moral and compass and say that it's being at a set position. But
Yeah.
I think now we're saying, hey, you know, that compass previously did not sort of take care of all these other perspectives. And because of that, these other little blimps of morality have occurred.
Yeah.
Again, how can we be the arbitrators of that system of ethics when those people are just trying to survive? When you have a set of people who are just trying to survive in their own identity shape, compared to a situation that has its pre-existing parameters, you do have to redefine things.
Yes, because that moral compass wasn't set by the people who are being affected.
Exactly.
Right.
So I think that's why it looks different, but really, and we're seeing this from now, right? There is a lot of transformation happening, and there's a lot of reaction to that transformation, right? We're seeing quite a lot of right-wing objection to what's going on in society. We're seeing a lot of left-wing objection to what's going on. So there is a lot of this going on right now where the moral compass is almost up for grabs.
Right.
But whether it always has been really might be the actual question.
Right. Yeah. Because you talked earlier about the second wave.
Right.
How is that playing out in fiction? Is there a very conscious sort of community of second wave?
I don't know if it's conscious, but certainly I'm seeing in writers like Pashamala, Jean-Marc Hassan, John Chan Simpson, there is, you know, we talked about what the parameters are. There's no longer defining the parameters. There's no longer this constant, okay, this is what we are. We've just come here. Oh, isn't it cold in Canada kind of thing. We're moving across from that into sort of doing more aesthetic explorations, taking that point of view and seeing what it means to sort of advance it, to refine it, to ask different questions. I think we're seeing more dialogue between artists, asking each other questions, which I think lends itself to richer sort of conversations. Whereas before, I think, you know, an artist like Jhumpa Lahiri, for example, who's a phenomenal short story writer, it was very clear that when she was writing, that she would only be published if she was speaking to a white audience. So I think in that sense, her work had to sort of tell everybody what these things were, to do a lot of this definition foundation work, And on the backs of writers like that, we've been able to develop a little bit more. I think because we allow ourselves a little bit more nuance now, we're getting richer perspectives.
And so that kind of, do you now feel that you're not writing for a white audience? You're able to write for your own community, your own.
I think it's easier not to care. I mean, I think the realities of the marketplace is that you're writing for a white audience. I think there's a lot more leeway now to not care about that.
Right.
There's expectation now from readers to say, hey, you know what, you have a computer in your pocket. If you don't understand something, you can just Google it.
Yeah.
Rather than constantly doing this double work of explaining our perspective, rather than just sort of, imbuing it into the word.
Right.
Just from a purely aesthetic point of view, it harms the word, to constantly be having to explain yourself over and over again. So I think that's the reality.
Right. Danny, in Vancouver, do you feel yourself part of a community, a writing community that is writing not so much for the traditional white audience that the publishers have so far been concentrating on, but you're able to...
Yeah, I think so. I 100% think so. I'm quite lucky to be in a circle of writers who care and support myself, and I hopefully give in kind. But I think that it's not just about the instant community that is around you. There are folks here that I adore: Jay Simpson, Amber Dawn, Erin Kirsch, folks that are working really hard to be part of that community. But I think that there are so many different barriers that are still challenging in navigating your experience as a person of color who's or queer person or both who happens to be a writer. Like, for example, I finished A Clothesline Swing in 2015. Actually, that was an anonymous question. I was looking in the Q&A and I saw that. An anonymous question about the challenges in the process of writing and publishing the novel. I finished writing The Clothesline Swing in 2015, and of course, at the time, Syrian refugees were all the rage in the media. So I reached out to quite a big publisher in Canada, and I offered my book, and within 2 weeks, they emailed back being like, "Oh my God, yes, we'd love to publish your book." And I'm like, "Oh, this is not how publishing works. I'm supposed to struggle, supposed to cry, friends need to buy me wine. Like, what is going on here?"
You're supposed to be able to wallpaper your study with rejection slips, right?
Exactly, right? Like, you're supposed to be like rejected left, right, and center before you're published. But then I went down with them in the process, and they requested that I change so much about the clotheslines. They requested that the book literally shifts around to face white audience.
Really?
And they never said that word to word, but like they requested that I change the narrator from a second person to a third person because it's easier for English readers. They asked me to remove all mention of magic realism, all the ghouls and ghosts and death as a character and all of that from the book because magic realism is not that it's not the rage anymore. They asked me to make the book more chronologically setting rather than the fragmented, broken down narrative that I had for the book. And they asked me to add a white character because none of the characters at the time were white. They're like, is there no white people in there in that book? And I'm like, no.
You have to have a token white person in there.
Exactly, just have a token white person in there. So that was something that I experienced at the time.
So you withdrew the book? Did you?
I did. I withdrew the book, and that was a challenging thing. Like they promised me a lot of money in a time that I didn't have money. They promised me fame in marketing when I didn't have neither of those things. And then Nightwood Editions, who are a tiny little publisher on Gibson in British Columbia, which is the tiniest little city. It has like 300 people who live there.
But they're all big readers.
They're all big readers, and he was like, "I'll publish your book the way it is." I'm like, "Okay, I'll I'll buy into it. But it took 2 years for that to happen.
Yeah.
And I got all the rejection letters, and I wallpapered my home with that. And those kind of challenges are not just limited to the publishing. They are also on panels like this. Like, I was, during my first tour for the Clothesline Swing, I was always paired with 3 or 4 other folks who are writing about immigration, who all happen to be white, and they're all writing about immigration, non-fiction kind of things, like books in non-fiction kind of things. And they get the juicy questions about immigration. And then I get questions like, so when you arrived to Canada, did you feel welcomed? And I'll be like, there's no nuance to that question. Like, if I said yes, then I'm denying my own experiences and the challenges that I bring with me. And if I said no, I literally just got everybody in this hole to hate me. So you see what I mean? So there was a lot of, and again, that's where the immigrant experience, the person of color experience, being tokenized on panels is how the canned lit society is navigating those challenges, I guess.
Just to riff off what Danny's saying, it's like, I mean, that experience is very, relatable, and there's a lot of rhetoric around diversity. There's a lot of talk around diversity. There's a lot of tweets about diversity, but the actual hard work of the nuanced books, it's no surprise at all that Danny would submit a book that's nuanced, but is not, it would frighten the publisher because they don't know what that's like, and they probably don't have any editors that are people of color. They don't have anyone vouching the books from them. And you see all these writers at this stage where all these people in publishing, they're writers, they sort of use us for our blood. But then when you go to the mid-level, are the editors people of color? Are the marketing departments people of color? Are the accountants people of color? These people that actually make the decisions, are they people of color? Do they understand what we're doing? Are they interested in what we're doing? And do they see profitability in what we're doing? Because I think there's so much rhetoric about this stuff, but if you just go to a chapters and you look at a book stand or something like that, you'll see the same old kind of shit. You'll see the same old kind of books from the big publishers. They're still publishing the books about being a good immigrant, being a happy immigrant, missing, your grandmother's curry and stuff like that. And I think the smaller publishers are doing good work, are looking to actual voices that are different, that are new, that might be frightening if you're white because you don't understand the voice. But I still think that is a large frustration with the industry on a whole, where it is still stuck in the stage of tokenization, where it's almost like, hey, let's just put Danny on a panel with 3 white dudes and ask him the question that's the most basic. And what Danny says is completely right. He would have to deal with the expectation of not only answering correctly, but making this entire industry of white people feel good about themselves. Feel happy that, oh, look, we invited this guy to a panel. That's it. We've done our job. We don't need to actually take his work seriously. We don't need to ask him questions about craft. We just need to make sure that he's in Canada, he's happy about it, and that's it. That's all we really want to hear from him.
I completely agree. Thank you so much for bringing it and putting it that way, Adnan. Like, I think the challenge in sitting in that seat is that, yes, there's my identity and my belief and my moral system, and then there's also my hope and dream, trying to navigate that question while being quote unquote politically correct is in itself such a challenge, because I want to say that no, that question is basic and I would rather answer something that is more interesting, that is more nuanced. But at the same time, I don't want the people who are like 200 people who are sitting in the hall, or the 250 people who are now watching us, to be like, oh, I'll never buy his book.
Exactly. Yeah.
Kagazo, this is your third novel, right?
Yeah.
And the first two have been quite well received in South Africa. They're put on courses and being read in schools. And this novel is the first one that was actually published in Canada. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true.
And have you noticed any difference between the reception or the editing process that you had to go through?
Yeah, I've I've been quite lucky. I haven't gotten many rejections. Actually, it's my fourth book. I haven't gotten. I was not experienced with rejections for a while. And then I tried to put out Such a Lonely, Lovely Road, and that was my first experience of getting lots of rejection. And I got a lot of rejections. And I think the trouble was also, you know, this isn't the Africa that we imagine. This isn't the Africa that we want to see in novels, or that, you know, people are excited about in novels. And I've had trouble with, you know, publishers not wanting covers that make, you know, that give Westerners the picture of Africa that Westerners are used to. And that's been also quite challenging. I think I'm lucky because my writing community is all over the world. I have friends in Asia and Europe who are, you know, constantly asking these questions. And something that's exciting that's starting to happen is that people are starting their own writers' festivals, because we're so sick of these questions. We're so sick of, you know, being on a panel and being expected to represent all of Africa or all of, you know, your people. Also, and I got so tired of being the only Black person ever invited. So that's kind of part of actually what I love about being part of the Fold this year. I've been lucky in that I've, you know, been in a position to have these discussions with writers and poets from all over the world, and all of us are saying we need more Indigenous literature festivals. We need festivals that are, you know, by us and for us, and that's, I think that's just a wave through the world, and I think we're going to see that happening more and more, where we can have very excited, nuanced, intelligent discussions, and we won't have to feel like, you know, we were invited because they needed to put in one Black person, or they needed to put in one, you know, whoever it is. And I was at a writers festival recently with an Indigenous Canadian author, and she and I looked at each other and we were like, what the hell is this? You know, this is Canada, and we know that, you know, there is every kind of person writing right now. And right now we are in a very large writers festival, and the two of us are the two representatives of, you know, the diversity of Canada. It's very frustrating, and I think we're all sick of it. And I think people are going to see that more and more of us are going to move forward and create our own spaces where we can be artists in our own right, where we can talk about prose, and we can talk about, you know, how we work with dialogue. We can talk about anything we want to talk about, and not have to think about, you know, am I adequately representing, you know, my people, whoever you think my people are, just by looking at me. And I think we're moving towards, I think we're moving in the right direction. We're moving towards some exciting times.
Do you find it as writing to have those thoughts in the back of your head as you're writing? That's a question for everybody, I guess.
I came into it when I was younger. So I was 25 when I first put out my first novel. And I was constantly asking, am I speaking, you know, I'm speaking to a Western, my first novel was published in Canada first and then sold to a South African publisher. I was constantly asking those questions. Am I speaking to the right audience? Is a Western audience going to understand, you know, and I think if you look back, or when I look back, I realized that at the beginning, I was trying to really put out a picture of the Africa that I think the Western audience wanted to see. Mm-hmm. I don't do that anymore. One thing I'm very, very strict about is that I don't translate Tswana in my books. I've heard some Indigenous authors say in Canada that they don't translate Indigenous languages. And I think that's the point. The point is you have to do the work. We are not going to do the translation for you. So I think we have become a lot more confident. And I think it was exciting to hear writers like Toni Morrison be very bold and say, I am intentional about writing for a Black audience. So I don't explain myself anymore. And it begins with me with little things like not explaining Tswana phrases if I use Tswana. I'm currently learning Inuktitut because of my next novel. And I'm also thinking about, you know, how am I going to do this when I write it in the novel? And rule number one, don't translate.
So, but not translating is, do you still try to put the Inuktitut or whatever word into a context so that someone who doesn't speak that language can sort of figure out what it means, or do they have to actually go to a dictionary and look it up?
I think if you're engaged enough in the story,
Yeah.
you can usually kind of get the gist of what the character is saying. Yeah, and if it's too hard and if you're not getting it, then I guess you'll have to go to a dictionary. But I think in any context, even when you're watching a film in a foreign language, you realize after a while you're not always looking at the subtitles because you can follow the not always. You can.
Moby Dick has like 100 pages on whaling and boats and stuff like that are just essays. And I think people have managed to read Moby Dick and appreciate it without knowing anything about whaling. But when it comes to another language, people suddenly get very terrified that you're making them learn about someone else, you know. So
I even look at subtitles when the characters are speaking in English. So.
I think, like, for me, to be honest, like I'm guilty of reading the reviews on Swing, and one of the 1-star reviews that I got, and I was this close to like flip at the person, is saying that they couldn't read some of the words that I left there that are from in Arabic, and they wanted an index at the end with translations of each word. And I'm like, A, I left it in context, and B, like literally Google it. Like why are we having this conversation? I learned a whole freaking language to write this book for you, so might as well just Google the words that I included in Arabic. Like, come on.
Yeah.
I think, to go back to your question, I'm sorry, Adnan, maybe if it might take, can I go?
No, go ahead.
Thank you. To go back to your question, I think that it is quite important to me to have the stories of Syrian queer refugees in my writing, or Syrian refugees in general in my writing, not because I have this like cause on the back of my head that I like want to carry like a backpack throughout my writing. It's because I'm really interested in those experiences. I'm interested in the individuality of each one of those experiences, and in the uniqueness of the many roads that leads one person to the other side of the world. It's quite glamorous, interesting, and fun to see, to be honest, for me to unfold in front of me and then write a story that is empowering yet dark and engaging yet heartbreaking. It's important to me as an author. Like, I was asked, again, like talking about shitty questions in panels, I was asked by an audience member because I mentioned that my next novel is also about queer Syrian refugees. And she asked, she was like, oh, but didn't you just write The Clothesline Swing, which is about queer Syrian refugees? And I'm like, there's not one story. Like, I didn't just write the book on Syrian refugees for dummies. Like, this is not how I'm writing here. There are different, unique, and like, it's a challenge for me, to be honest. Like, I challenge myself to tell those unique stories, to bring new perspectives to the experiences of queer Syrian refugees. And it's very nuanced. Again, I love this word, but it's very nuanced. But I think I'm the only queer Syrian person with a refugee experience. Again, like very intersectional. But I think that I'm the only person with like some sort of a platform ever. Like the girl, the white actress who was the executive producer of Girls. What's her name?
Lena Dunham?
Yes, Lena Dunham. She's writing a freaking movie about Syrian refugees. I'm like, who are you? And like, why are you the one who's writing that movie? Like, come on, like, I'm right here. I'm verified on Twitter. Please.
Yeah. But you're representing your whole class there.
No. I'm representing my own understanding and experiences on navigating a very vast experience of queer folks who are refugees, who are navigating society, navigating cultures and religions. So my experience and what I represent is just this spiritual queer man who's married to a white boy, and that's about it.
Yeah, no,
I write what I can.
What Kagaso was saying is that you should not be held up as a representative of a group, that you have your own artistic and
I think that's the thing, is that we get read as if our books are guidebooks.
yeah.
Hey, this is what it's like to be this type of person or from this place, and we're going to give like some sort of an encyclopedic definition of what it means to do this, as opposed to, hey, you're following the character and their interiority, and that's what we're actually rendering.
Yeah. I hope I haven't asked any shitty questions in this panel, but
not yet. There's still time.
Not yet. Well, we're going to. I think is it time to go to audience questions? Have we had some? Is there someone out there who can answer this question?
Yes.
Have a lot.
Brenda says yes.
Where?
If you click on Q&A down there,
All right. Okay.
you'll see the audience questions, my friend.
Okay. Good. So from Mary Fraser Hamilton, the question: have you ever gone into a novel knowing you want to explore an issue and found a character to match, or is it always the character come first? It's a good question. Who wants to tackle that one first?
I'll go. For me, it's always the character who comes first. And that's the place I work from. I get really familiar with the character. I get to know them really well. And it feels like they have a fully lived experience, and they're inviting me into their world to tell me all about it. And that's how it begins. And then what is gonna happen, I never know. So it's this journey for me, and I love it. I love that, writing a novel is like traveling with somebody that I'm getting to know, and I never know what the end is gonna look like. And I don't usually know exactly what the issue is, but it comes up somewhere in the middle, and I just go with it.
But you don't map it out before you start writing the book?
I have never mapped a book out in my life, and I never will. I'm convinced that's the secret to my success, is never ever map it out. I'm actually a little bit, yeah. I believe I never should, because then it's not as fun for me. It's not as exciting. I like waking up and not knowing what's gonna happen next, and then I just flow with it. And I write very quickly when I do. I go through long periods of writing nothing at all, and then when I sit down, it just all kind of flows out. And I think it's because I'm working on it in my head the whole time instead of writing things down. Yeah.
It's funny that you said that, like mapping out my novels is literally the secret of my success. I sit down, in front of, like, I have a freaking whiteboard, like it's a big ass whiteboard, and I just like draw events after events, and I have shapes. Like my next book is shaped like a spaceship for some reason. It's interesting. We'll see. But yes, it's each author have their own way, I guess.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Adnan, how about you?
I think when we talk about ideas, we talk about them like they're these things floating in the air, perfectly formed. But the reality is that they're made specific by characters, right? So I think the character has to come first in order for that idea to have any real weight, and to have any sort of real shape. So yeah.
I think it's dangerous to say, I'm going to sit down and write a book about X, and then come up with some characters who would fit into that thing. Now,
right.
The characters really have to come first. A student once asked me when the best time was to write an outline for a novel. And I said, after you finish writing the novel. Because some publisher or editor or agent or someone's going to ask you for an outline, right? So, but write the novel first.
Yeah.
No.
No, don't write it at all.
Oh, wow.
I think that might be it for the questions.
Oh, really?
If we're ready to move on.
To move on to author questions?
Well, just to the closing of the session, and I think Jael's going to come on with the Kahoot, which we've been doing throughout the Fold weekend. So I'm going to come on and just say thank you to everybody. Thank you for joining us, audience. Thank you, Wayne Grady, Kahiso Lesejo Balope, Adnan Khan, Denny Ramadan for being here. Thank you to our sponsors who graciously continue to support The Fold, even as we transition into this online model. That's a big deal, so we thank you very much. And if you enjoyed today's panel, please consider ways that you might continue to support The Fold. You can follow us online, share word about this event and the other events that we have coming up. And while everything has been free on Zoom this weekend, you can donate to the Fold Foundation at Canada Helps, and we're a registered charity, so you get a tax receipt for that as well. So thank you again, everybody, and be sure to write well.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Happy writing. Bye.
You all.
Bye.